Hey guys, welcome to the last Fashion Friday of 2020. I just want to say thank you so much for following along, for supporting me in this. I have so much fun doing these. Today we're going to play Fashion Jeopardy, and the theme is all about symbolism. These are images or products or shows that have really shaped fashion and really signify kind of the greatest moments. Two of the shows that we're going to discuss are actually shows that I consider to be my favorite in the history of fashion, and if I had a time machine, I absolutely would go back and watch these shows in person if I could, because I probably would drop dead. They were so incredible. So let's dive in. First question. Which luxury brand began as a saddlery? Was it Gucci, Hermes, Chloe, or Fendi? It was Hermes. Now, that's probably pretty obvious. They actually have a horse in their logo. But what I love about this fact is that this really signifies how far luxury brands have come. Hermes is not the only one like this. Most luxury designers started as something else and then evolved into what they are now. So Hermes started as a saddlery, Prada started as a luggage company, Fendi started as a fur company. What I love about the Hermes story is that they're a very old brand. They actually started in the early 1800s. Their very first product was actually a harness, and they created it in 1837. So what's so interesting is that for basically a century, the only client for Hermes was a horse. It was not a glamorous woman, it was not a socialite, it was a horse. They actually still make between 400 and 500 saddles per year. It is all done entirely by hand. And if you know the Hermes way, only one artisan works on a piece at a time. So it is not a production line setup. It's not one person does, the first part of it and then it moves on to the next station. It is the same craftsman, the same expert, starting from the very beginning until completion. And I think that that's so cool because you really see their hand, their work, that detail when you have something like that. Clearly a very specific customer buys an Hermes saddle because obviously 400 to 500 a year, that's not very many. So you're paying a pretty price if you have a Hermes saddle. We know Hermes because of the Birkin bag. And while that is their modern day hero piece, it's so interesting to me that, most people don't know that, no, this was a company that catered to equestrians and people who ride horses. So a couple interesting facts about Birkins, if you don't know, there are about 200,000 Birkins in the entire world. Like I said, because one artisan works on it at a time, they are very coveted, they are very expensive. It takes about 48 hours to produce one standard Birkin bag. Victoria Beckham reportedly has over 100 of them. I think she has rumored the largest collection in the world. I'm sure there's probably a housewife somewhere on The Real Housewives that has a pretty good collection as well. But yeah, it's a super interesting company. They've been around forever. Okay, question number 2. Who invented Madonna's cone bra? Was it Tom Ford, Bob Mackie, Gianni Versace, or Jean-Paul Gaultier? It was Jean-Paul Gaultier. What I like about this is that Madonna's cone bra kind of defines Madonna almost as much as her music. It clearly was a huge fashion movement in the early 90s when she was touring. When we think of Madonna's Vogue, that's exactly the image that comes into mind. It really, really was so Madonna. And what I like about this story is that Jean-Paul Gaultier is a really interesting cat. He actually just retired this year in 2020 after 50 years designing. So he has a very long, fabulous career. He was raised by all women and actually started sketching at a very, very young age as a child. And he actually said he first invented the cone bra when he was 13 years old, and it was for his teddy bear. So there you go. Years later, it would be made famous by Madonna while touring. And Gautier is really interesting. He was kind of dubbed the unruly child. He always went against the grain, marched to his own beat, and he has a big impact on Hollywood. Not only the music industry, but also film. If you are familiar with the movie The Fifth Element, it is one of my favorite movies as a sci-fi nerd and a nostalgia nerd. He costumed that movie. And there's a super interesting fact about that movie in particular. Chris Tucker's part was actually supposed to be played by Prince, and that was the goal. Gautier actually had a meeting with Prince and tried to describe his vision for some of the costumes that Prince would wear in the film, and that meeting went very badly. And while Prince cited his rigorous touring schedule as the reason why he ended up pulling out of the movie, that was also this meeting with Gautier another reason why. Gautier had created basically a flesh-colored bodysuit that Prince would wear, adorned with really long hair. I mean, it was absolutely crazy. And because he spoke very broken English, French is obviously the language he speaks, when he met with Prince, he was trying to describe certain features of this jumpsuit, and he kept saying faux cul, which means fake ass in French, to tell him that, you know, he wouldn't actually be nude. It was a whole bodysuit. And Prince thought he was telling him to F off. And so that meeting went terrible. And there you go. That kind of ended Prince's role in The Fifth Element. But Gautier would go on to costume several other films and do lots of music videos and things for other musicians. So he really is kind of an interesting character. Question number 3, which designer frequently used birds in his designs and as his inspiration? Was it Yohji Yamamoto, Saint Laurent, Christian Lacroix, or Alexander McQueen? This one is another pretty obvious one. If you follow even a fraction of McQueen's work, you know that he uses feathers, wings, talons, the concept of flight. It's basically almost in every collection he ever created. The most famous, which is one of the shows that I deem the greatest in the history of fashion, is his Spring/Summer 2001 show. You guys, the show was, I really wish I had a time machine to be able to go back. I literally would have probably dropped dead on the site just watching this show. It was entitled Voss, after a wildlife preserve in Norway, but the stage, the setting of the show was actually an insane asylum. So he created a glass cube that the models walked inside of. It had padded walls. The models could not see the audience on the outside, but the audience could look in on the models on the inside. And McQueen was very influenced by birds in this particular design. Probably the most famous was a headdress that he created with 3 taxidermied hawks. Jane Parfit actually wore this outfit. The skirt had feathers. It was crazy and amazing. And the birds were positioned like in attack mode, like a la Alfred Hitchcock birds. It was super haunting and creepy and quintessential McQueen. And what he told his models when they were walking through this asylum is he told them to go mental. And so it is such a profound example of performance art on the catwalk, because these models were not just walking. I mean, they were laughing maniacally. They were just going mental. It's really super, super interesting to watch. There are films of this show, but the imagery is super powerful as well. The most famous look of this particular show was worn by Erin O'Connor, and it was a dress that McQueen created made entirely of razor clamshells. And right before she was about to go out on stage, he told her to destroy the dress, to rip it off. And so as she's walking down the runway, she's basically having like a nervous breakdown, and she's ripping these shells from her body. And she does so with such dedication that by the end of her walk, all her hands were completely bloodied, and you see the carnage of the shells all over the runway floor. It's so beyond, like the most epic fashion moment ever, you guys. Her dad was actually in the audience and like gave this beautiful quote about what he saw. It was just so profound. At the end of the show, the walls of the glass cube actually fell down and shattered, and on the inside there was a second cube. Those walls fell down and shattered, and there was a writer, a performance artist in the middle, covered in moths, wearing like a mask with a breathing tube. It was so creepy and crazy. The collection itself was just gorgeous. You have to look it up. You can check out a link on my actual blog post for the full collection. Okay, last question. Which designer went from poverty to fashion's #1 designer almost overnight? Was it John Galliano, Marc Jacobs, Ralph Lauren, or Michael Kors? This is another show that I would just love to be able to travel back in time to see in person. It was John Galliano. This is dubbed the show that almost never happened. It happened in 1994. It was the fall-winter show, and he was totally bankrupt. All of Galliano's financial backers had pulled out. He had no money. Andre Leon Talley has gone on multiple interviews to say that when he found Galliano, he was curled up on the floor of a friend's apartment, wrapped in a sleeping bag, heating up canned meat on a Bunsen burner on the floor. I mean, he literally had nothing. And Andre Leon Talley and several other fashion heavy hitters believed in him so much that they basically cobbled this show together literally at the last minute. They knew that he could not miss showing in the fall of 1994, and so they helped him gain financial backers again. They found a venue for him, and the show went on. They were able to secure $50,000 from a private investor that Andre Leon Talley set up, and the famous Parisian socialite Sao Schlemberg actually donated her home to use as the venue for this particular show. You know, it was so last minute that Galliano was sewing Kate Moss into her dress right before she walked down the runway, and it really set Galliano's career ablaze. It was so profound, it was so groundbreaking. His talent was really at the peak of his career within this collection that people lost their minds. I mean, it was like the living end. And within less than a year after this show, he would be named the head designer for Givenchy, which is the first time a British designer in the history of the French fashion house was ever named lead. So it was a huge deal in Galliano's career. Clearly he would go on for Dior, his own line, and now Margiela. But it really was the symbolic show that started it all. You know, I do want to say clearly he wasn't an overnight success. No creative genius in any field ever finds success overnight. It is years and years of hard work, toiling away. But this particular show, because it went from such a bad beginning to such a masterful ending, really is kind of this story of a phoenix rising from the ashes. So I hope you enjoyed that. I loved revisiting all of these moments in the history of fashion. Fashion Jeopardy is super fun for me. I love that you guys love it too. Let me know what you think. Have a safe and happy holiday, and here's to 2021.